Welcome to Confessions of an EOS Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of EOS implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in. Hey, we've got a great show today with Beth Fahey. We talked about everything from what a great boss is and what a great boss is not. Spoiler, it's not someone that wears fancy clothes. That's a task manager. It's somebody that leads and that inspires. And Beth really gets into this idea of listening and what listening actually is. We also talked about what it's like to put a team, an existing team, into place, into an accountability chart. So if you're implementing EOS and you've got a team of, let's say, 30 people, and you might have an organizational chart or may have a general understanding of what everybody does, some of the things to watch out for, some of the things to prepare for as you're going to move that organization and those people into an accountability chart and assign their different seats. And probably my most favorite, we talked about one of the biggest hacks for visionaries. One thing visionaries can do so they don't destroy their own business. This is a personal favorite of mine. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I enjoyed the conversation, and we'll see you after. You're in the baking business. Like, that's how this all started. Like, how, talk me through that. How did you get started in a bakery?
Well, I think it was 2002, my sister called me, and this was post the .com bubble bursting. I was living in LA. I had 3 small kids. I was kind of pulling my hair out. And she said, hey, the bakery that I work at, the owners are getting divorced. They want me to buy the bakery. And I said, oh, well, let me see some of the financials, because, I thought I knew everything about financials because while my kids were little, I also had a bookkeeping business because I got an A in accounting in high school. So I thought I could have a bookkeeping business, which I did. I mean, I did that. And so I said, well, hey, let me see the financials. And the financials literally came on a legal pad that was handwritten by the Greek owners of the place. And it was a cash business. And, I just kind of had to believe what I saw on the piece of paper. And I said, if these numbers are true, you should buy this business because it's a cash cow. And so it was an established bakery. They did a lot of wedding cakes, like 400 wedding cakes a year. They did a tremendous volume. And Becky was there, right place, right time. And I said, hey, let's do this together. And so I moved my family back from California. My husband works in the film business. I used to work in the film business. And so, he was on location all the time anyway. And I figured I'd rather be home near my family, with these little kids. And so that's kind of how I started owning a bakery. And, I didn't know anything.
To baker.
What's that? Accountant to baker. Yeah. Well, it's really funny because in that industry, in the baking industry, there's a lot of people that fall into baking. They started out as, a lot of them, weirdly, engineers, which actually makes a lot of sense because it's a very sciencey, side of food production. A lot of people left corporate jobs, were really dissatisfied and became, bakery owners as a result of that. So as I got to know people in that industry, it was really fascinating, just the backgrounds that people came from. It wasn't all, I grew up in a bakery stuff. Most of the time it wasn't. It was a passion of theirs. So that was kind of cool.
Interesting. And so did your sister have any baking experience?
So my sister, started at 19. She had originally worked at Jewel, which is a grocery store in Chicago. And she did that for about a year and hated it. And then saw that there was a local bakery nearby. And she, I think she went to junior college for like a year and it just wasn't for her. And so when she ended up at Creative Cakes, which is the name of the bakery that we had, she found her talent, right? She's artistic, beautiful handwriting, beautiful flowers. And so she was their cake decorator and head baker. And basically, she did everything at that bakery. And so when I came in, it was just she and we just started, the two of us. And so I didn't know anything about baking, but I loved food. And so I guess what I brought to the equation was I knew a lot about web design. I knew enough about finance. I was a natural born salesperson, kind of always had been. And, I sold stuff door to door as a little kid, seeds, stationery, the typical entrepreneur story, right? I had to get my candy money somehow, and that's how I did it, right? So I looked in the back of Mad Magazine and I was like, oh, I'll sell this thing, and so.
It's so interesting. Like I think most people that I talk to that have an interest in entrepreneurship, it discovered it or had traits of this very early on. Like I used to sell creepy crawlers in third grade. I used to make them in the little easy bake oven thing and then take them in and sell them for $0.25 a pop. And like so many journeys that I hear about, like there's something that happened early on where you can already see signs that like you're going to be a rule breaker. And the other interesting thing that you just talked about was this notion of kind of like divide and conquer. Because any company that I've started that has been somewhat successful, I've always had someone that complimented me. And complimenting doesn't mean that we're both good at the same thing. It means that what I am terrible in the world at, they are best in the world at. And it just creates magic. And so it sounds like you really brought kind of the vision, the marketing, the business and accounting, and your sister brought the creative aspect, the baking, the actual like the product of what you guys were selling.
Yeah. And it worked great. And we doubled that business year over year for like 6 consecutive years. We just were growing like crazy. And that's how we ended up, bringing EOS into the company because, I have a film degree, right? I went to film school. My sister, I told you her education, we both felt like we were out over our skis. We both were like, what are we doing? And we read everything that we possibly could. We went to Zingerman's. We attended tons of seminars. I joined Vistage, just tried to learn as much as possible by reading and talking to other people about running businesses. And what I soon found out was like, most entrepreneurs don't go to college. Most people who start businesses don't say, hey, I'm going to go to college so I can start a business someday. Something happens like, the phone call I got from my sister and this, long suppressed itch, that they've had to go out on their own and go do their own thing. They see it as an opportunity. And that's what I see with most entrepreneurs is that they're opportunistic, right? They are going to, seize any opportunity that presents itself in front of them. So that's how they're wired.
And what's before you implemented EOS and probably got into this thing called the accountability chart, what titles did you and your sister give yourselves?
Oh, we were just owners. We just own the business. And that seemed to, a lot of our customers were like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. 2 sisters owning a bakery together. And, and then eventually, when we had like 32 employees and we were pulling our hair out and everybody was doing everything, classic story, we decided that, EOS and getting some role clarity was going to really help us. And it totally did. Absolutely did.
So how many employees did you have when you first bought the business?
It was just the 2 of us. We did everything. We knew. Yeah. So we basically 10x that business in a period of 6 years. So it was, $200,000 a year to $2 million a year, but, not huge numbers, but for a standalone bakery, those are pretty good numbers. And the other thing that, we were smart about adding the right people at the right time. The first person we added was just somebody to help us in production. And then we realized we really just needed dishwasher, and so we were pretty strategic about the people that we started adding. And before you knew it, we had departments, sales, production, logistics, finance and things like that once EOS came in. But before that, everybody did everything and it was a hot mess, just like every entrepreneurial company.
And when you 10x a bakery, I'm assuming that when you think about a bakery, like there's a lot of equipment, there's a lot of space that's needed to be able to develop the product, which in this case is cakes and cookies and whatever else that you were selling. So when you 10x a business like that, you're probably not staying in the same shop that could support 2 people.
No, we had 3 or 4 expansions. I think 4. So every other year we were adding new space to the bakery. And, so not only do you have the stress of running the day-to-day of a bakery, keeping up with orders and all that stuff, but then you're, planning your next move, or, building out in the back, or adding a room, or adding a second floor, things like that. So we were constantly in a state of expansion until we reached about 6,000 square feet. And bakeries do require quite a bit of space. And we were in a strip mall. So, we took an apartment upstairs to put our offices in. It was just like, it seemed like every other year we were adding. So.
And as you're adding space, you're also adding equipment at that point. And so, as these things are coming together, are you nervous? Are you risk averse? Like, how are you thinking about investing in a lot of these kind of capital expenditure type of things?
Yeah. I mean, when we bought the bakery, we bought it lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, it was just, it was turnkey. Literally, they gave us the keys and we just, ran the bakery. And they had a nice reputation and all that stuff, but they had really old equipment. The good news is that in the world of bakery, an old Hobart mixer is the best thing in the whole world, and all you needed to do was figure out where your buckle was. And it's very much like EOS, right? It's like you're hitting a ceiling. And I kind of explain that to people. It's like at some point, the mixer's not big enough, or the oven's not big enough, or your walk-in isn't big enough, and you're hitting a ceiling. And you've just got to figure out, how can I make the biggest batch possible? Because that keeps the labor down, so it became a game of efficiencies, right? And so how can we become more efficient? How can we automate more? So buying a cookie machine, for example, to, churn out chocolate chip cookie pucks was, it took a fifth of the time that it did scooping that stuff by hand. So, I mean, a lot of the things that we bought over time, sheeters, were all time-saving devices.
Got it. And you've talked about this notion of a brick wall, and it sounds like it was somewhere around 30 employees. Like what were you seeing at that point where like what you were doing was not working?
Well, okay. So from a customer standpoint, we were crushing it. Okay. And, we were always growing, and people were coming in all the time and saying, oh, you're adding in more space and da 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 da. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was when we added a cafe. So we had toyed with the idea of opening multiple locations and talked to other bakery owners that had done that. And they were like, don't do it. Don't do it. You're going to be in your car all the time. You're going to be stretched so thin, and trying to manage two different places, it's already hard enough to manage one. So what ended up happening was the space next to us in the strip mall we were in, the tenants moved out, and it was a big space. And we were like, oh, well, this is probably more space than we need. And visionary that I am, I'm like, what this town needs is a great cafe. And so, I think really I just wanted a great sandwich and a great salad, and I wanted it close and all that stuff. And, we did have great sandwiches and salads, but we entered into an area that we knew nothing about. Even though it was food adjacent, it's different. It's running a restaurant, not a bakery, and the margins are completely different, and, the processes are different. And so the first 6 months that we had that cafe, it was beautiful. We had black and white penny tile inside. We had, black chandeliers with crystals and, these fancy cases and espresso. And, people walked in and they were like, oh my gosh, this is too nice for this town. You should really, it's too fancy. And what ended up happening was, I think had we been in a different location, we probably would have been more successful. But we were in a pretty blue collar, salt of the earth kind of a reverence for chain restaurants kind of town, as opposed to supporting local. And so while we had a great reputation, 4.9 stars, on every, review site and all that stuff, it was just a lot of work for not a lot of money. And really, looking back, we added the cafe, and it just put all this stress on us. And my sister and I were working 80 to 100 hours a week, like for months. And it was just not sustainable. It was too much. And that's when we brought EOS in. And one of the first things that our implementer said to us is, we need to talk about your core focus and see if, maybe we need to take a step back. And it took us a while. It took us like honestly, we knew what the right answer was. It took us a year and a half to get out of it.
And what drove that year and a half timeline? Like I think back to decisions, mostly people decisions with me, and it's things that like we just let things slide, and instead of me making the decision to whatever the case may have been for that individual, it just kind of continues to perpetuate until you're fed up, and then you make the decision. With this one specifically, like why the year and a half?
So we wanted to be sure. I ran numbers. I'd always run separate numbers for the cafe just to see how profitable the cafe was, and it just wasn't. And honestly, I brought it back to the leadership team, and I think that we had a pride problem, and we didn't want to look like we failed in front of the town, by adding this cafe. And we stuck it out a year longer than we should have, but we all knew the answer. We all knew that it just wasn't that profitable. I mean, you don't make that much on sandwiches. Like the joke is you make 10 cents on a sandwich. So you're not far off. Bakery, a lot more profitable, right? So
and did that experience shape the way in which you make future decisions? Like, do you find yourself making quicker decisions based upon gut and instinct than you did back then?
So I'm a high quick start, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I'm a high quick start. So I'm not afraid of experimenting, right? It's the partners that I'm with that have to go along on that ride with me that it was really awful for them, right? So I just needed to, kind of realize that, and, since that's happened, I'm always checking my quick start because it is if you know Colby at all, there's the 4 modes: fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. Quick start is my highest number, which means that it's going to drive most of my decisions. I tend to make decisions pretty quickly. And, so, I was okay with the experiment, but everybody else just, it wasn't. They wanted it to work. Yeah. So since then, where I kind of do some introspection is when I go into a fugue state and I have a great idea as a visionary, I now have a rule for myself that I have to write it out and just let it sit for a while, and that I cannot just go for it. It doesn't always stop me. Sometimes I send out an email that I shouldn't. Sometimes but I try to remember these times where, my quick start got me into trouble. My husband always makes the joke about how, this is like 30 years ago, 25 years ago. I went out for a Christmas tree and I came back with a big screen TV. It's just like, that's kind of the story of my life.
How do you actually just answered my next question, because I struggle with the same thing. So I'm also a quick start, and like if I have an idea, like I will chase it down. Like for instance, we just swapped CRM systems within 48 hours because I'm like, I can't deal with the system we have in place, and we're going with something else. And we did it. But most of the time it gets me in trouble. And so my next question is going to be like, how do you deal with that? And I loved what you just said of like, so I do something similar, which is put it in the parking lot. So if I have an idea, I've got a list and I just throw it in the parking lot, and I'll revisit the parking lot. And if I'm still as amped up about that idea, then I'll start to like, pull the thread a little bit. But here's what's interesting. What's interesting in this case is your quick start was right. And like, that's what I struggle with, like deep down, is like, there's a lot of times I know I'm right, but I have to play the game, especially in the Navy, play the game of politics to be able to get to where I know we have to get to. So like,
yeah. And that's but that's every visionary struggle, right? And you've got people on your team that are supposed to slow you down, my husband is like a 2 in quick start. So for us buying a home 2.5 years ago, it literally took us 2 years. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we've got to, interest rates are starting to go up. I'm hearing the news. We've got to, and then finally it was now. We must go now. We have to get the house now. And we ended up locking it in before these crazy interest rates. So thankfully. But anyway, yeah, it's the natural tension, right? We've got to have the push and pull in our businesses. We tend to find people in our personal lives that, serve that purpose. But sometimes, if you're just left alone to your own devices, you've got to have a mechanism like a journal or a parking lot or something like that, because, you don't want to repeat history.
And so as you're going from 2 people that work there and the 2 people are the owners of the company to 30, like, did you learn about leadership on the fly? Is this something that you had been studying and reading up on and trying to figure out like how to influence people to push them and inspire them towards a common vision? Or was this something where like, well, we've got 1 hire, now we've got 5, now we've got 10. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah. So, I mean, I tell all these stories when I do Great Boss workshops. I tell so many terrible stories of myself as a boss, because I had this idea of what a boss was supposed to be. Look, I'm an older Gen X. Okay. So I grew up with my dad, who was a traditionalist, right? He's 98. He's in great health now, and he managed people for 45 years. But the stories I heard at the dinner table were all, there was no lovey-dovey kumbaya kind of management, right? And so in my head, and like a lot of people's heads, and still a lot of people's heads, you think you've got to be this tough guy. And so some of, my cringiest memories as a boss are when I was really trying to be a taskmaster and to, have a hard line about stuff. And I wasn't the greatest boss in the world. And so like, whenever I do talks or I do a Great Boss workshop, I always tell everybody, I said, the irony of me standing here in front of you, delivering a Great Boss workshop, it's like the joke isn't lost on me, because it's like, I guess if you want to learn something, teach it, and so only, I would say, in the last several years have I really taken it as seriously as I wish everyone would, right? Because we need it so desperately. We need leadership. We need good management, and it's so lacking. And I wish I'd had training, but that's also the problem of entrepreneurs. Ask, half a dozen entrepreneurs. They didn't go to, they don't have an MBA. They've never had any sort of management training whatsoever. And so they're just, building the plane as they're flying it, and they're just trying to get through. And they know they need to get better, but they don't really know how, and they don't know where there's any resources. And that's what's so great about EOS is it's just a great operating system that really shines a spotlight on LMA, leading, managing, and holding people accountable. And if you can get good at that, I would argue that 50% of your issues will go away on your issues list, because most of them are somehow tied to weakness in LMA, and we say, and weakness in the 6 key components, but, that sort of lack of, the right kind of feedback to your direct report, as opposed to the, get out of here, you're fired kind of stuff, which is what usually happens, right?
And that's, when, as you were talking through some of those examples, I identify as you said Gen X, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I identify as a Gen X on the lower
Is that
side.
how we're saying it now?
Yes. I don't know how I got thrown in with the millennials, because like I remember fax machines, and I remember like beepers and pager. I remember things before then and before smartphones. It was Saved by the Bell. So. But like similar upbringing. So like when I thought about what a leader was, and some of this was influenced by the Navy, because I first started off enlisted. I was enlisted air crewman, and like bosses had a certain like persona, leaders had a certain persona, and they were stern and they were strict. And so I followed that. So like my funny example, like I used to, for my first startup, I was like 29 years old, and I was wearing a suit into work each day. And this was a creative company where we did zombie events. And here comes the CEO in a suit, like just like completely different than everybody else. But it's because I thought that's like what I was supposed to do in that position. Do you think this ever actually worked? Because like what you and I observed growing up, like that was the way of the past. And there was, I experienced that probably for 10 years in the Navy. It's kind of kinder, gentler now. And I think we're starting to get on board. Bureaucracy is always a very long process. But did that style of leadership used to actually work?
I guess so. I mean, my dad stayed at the same company for 45 years. He survived 7 different mergers. The thing is with my dad is that my dad is he's just a sweet man, and I mean, smart guy, pretty good with people, pretty social. He ran the computer department, so he had a bunch of nerds. And so, I mean, he would come home sometimes and be really stressed out, but most of the time his stress wasn't from his direct reports. His stress was from the merger that was happening and all of the processes that were changing and, like big corporations coming in. It was Swift Eckridge. So, big, conglomerates would come and swallow them up. And so I just remember him taking beta blockers like when I was a kid because he was so stressed out. A lot of my dad's, like my memory of him was he was just, he left for work, 7 o'clock in the morning. He came home 6 o'clock on the dot. He had his hat, he had his overcoat, his galoshes. He came home and he was awake for like an hour and a half and then he'd go to bed. And so, dinner was really the only time we saw him. And if the conversation wasn't political, which it often was, dad was a Republican, mom was a Democrat, that was fun. Then it was about, the crazy people at work. And but not usually his direct reports. He was always very kind and very, I think he saw himself more as a mentor. And so there was something I picked up from him on that, like where I originally, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go like a little bit back in time here, where I think I became fascinated with leadership was I worked in the film business. So I worked on movies when I was, I'm 1989. So I was like 23. I started in the film business, moved out to California. And I got to tell you, I saw some pretty awful behavior. I mean, really bad. Directors, producers, awful stuff. And, when you're on the crew, it's usually a bunch of more, sort of salt of the earth kind of people. They're hard workers. An average day is 14 hours. So, I mean, really hard workers, interesting people, that kind of thing. But when we got a bad director or a bad producer, somebody that was just an egomaniac or a screamer or something like that, I mean, I really kind of took that in and thought, you don't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be that way. And so that's kind of something that I've always carried with me. And I've asked my dad, in fact, I did an interview with my dad. I recorded it on Zoom. It's on my YouTube channel because I really wanted to unpack this with him and just like, how did you do it? What was your secret thing? Because when my dad retired, people came up to me all the time and said, your dad was the best boss I ever had. Best boss, hands down, And so I asked him about that, and he's such a humble guy. And he's like, I don't know. I just listened to him. And you know what, though? That's it. That is a huge part of being a good leader and manager. It's just really listening, not waiting to respond, but really listening, trying to understand. And I think that is something, that just kind of came naturally to my dad.
Like you, I also took notes, and we had a lot of toxic leadership, specifically at the officer level in the Navy. Maybe I shouldn't say some of these things, but what I used to do is I used to take notes, and so I've got a notebook which I have transcribed to an Evernote list. But from 2002 to 2010, I would just take notes of all the things not to do, because I aspired to be a naval officer one day, and I wanted to serve, my sailors the best that I could, and understanding as like an E1 twice, and E1 through an E5, and really understanding like what it was like to be in those shoes, and what the perception was like based upon the signals. Like it could have been as something like one of the notes that I have is be 10 minutes early, because in the military, when something's happening, you've got to be 15 minutes early. And not only do you have to be 15 minutes early for your department, but then your division wants you to be 15 minutes early for the 15 minutes early. So you're actually there 30 minutes early. And it would boggle my mind that people that we were waiting on would come in 10 minutes late. And it's like, we've been standing here for 30 minutes. And so one of my notes is always be early, even as the leader, to show up. So I love your story, and it resonates. One question real quick on the bakery. So now you've hit the glass ceiling, and you've hit the glass ceiling. It sounds like you got a little bit outside of your core focus, and now it's like, we need something to help us. And you discovered EOS. I'm sure you read the book Traction. It sounds like the implementer came in and started helping you with the core focus. Talk to me a little bit about the accountability chart, because it like that would, to me, growing this 10x over 6 years, that to me would be a pretty interesting conversation to say like, okay, like now let's figure out what this organization actually looks like.
Yeah. So, like, like a lot of my clients, we brought everybody to the focus day and we probably overcomplicated it at the beginning. We had a separate sales, separate marketing, operations, which we call production, and then finance. We ended up with just the 3 seats. So sales and marketing in one, then operations, and then finance, and then visionary and integrator. So of those 5 seats, I sat in 4. And that was too much. I mean, and that was an issue like day one. Why is Beth in all these seats? Well, the fact is that, Becky was really great at production, but hadn't, she didn't know how to, do a bank reconciliation or how we paid our bills or, and I did a lot of the sales and the website and the marketing and, well, I guess I'll be the integrator because I'm bossy, I guess. And you can just throw me in the visionary seat because I'm the one with the crazy ideas too. And I knew it was too much, and so did everybody else. But it did take us a while, to get, and, part of it was my control issues. And, I always make the joke to my clients, like, do you think I had control issues sitting in 4 out of 5 of the leadership team seats? Yeah, but it took a while. And miraculously, one of our best cake decorators was a CPA, was a trained CPA. I know, weird, right? But that's what she did in her life before she went to pastry school. And so she's one of those people that left the corporate world. And, I was dying and needed help. And Fran stepped in and became our finance seat. And she did that so well that I was like, you know what? You need to be the integrator. And eventually my sister actually moved out of operations. She moved into sales. We put a young cake decorator who was, she was really strong. And so we put her in production, and then I just ended up in the visionary seat, and then I got bored. And so that's when we opened a cafe. Well, I mean, but that's what, left to their own devices, visionaries have to do something, right? We have to, so I didn't get smart enough to go start another business somewhere. I decided to just screw up the one that I had. So
that's a really interesting. So I've got a buddy. He was in my Vistage group out in Seattle. We still keep in touch. Shout out to Jake, director from Strideline. And some of the advice that he has gotten is to like start a side hustle so that he doesn't ruin the business that he has. And he's gotten that actually from our Vistage chair.
Yeah.
And you just said something very similar. Is that something that you actually believe in, or was that just
No, because I had to go do something else. So I became the president of the National Trade Association for Retail Bakers. So that kept me busy. I did a lot of speaking and stuff like that. And then I started thinking, after a couple of years running on EOS, I was like, you know what? I would like to do that. I think that would be fun. Because what I realized as the president of the RBA, Retail Bakers of America, I did a lot of speaking. We put on education for conferences, the bakery conference that happened every 3 years. We put on 300 different educational things. And I often spoke at least once or twice, did breakouts at those conferences. And I really enjoyed that. I actually like speaking. And I know it's most people's number one fear, but for me, it's never been an issue. I'm a theater kid, so, put me on a stage, right? So I really enjoyed doing that. But really at the crux of it, it was that I was helping other business owners get through the muck faster by teaching them some of the stuff that I'd learned through EOS. And so that's actually how I became an implementer. Is I did a talk, I think it was called Right Person, Right Seat, quite honestly. And somebody came up to me after the talk and said, hey, this EOS thing sounds pretty cool. I'd like to learn about that. And I said, oh yeah, just call them up. They'll find you an implementer in your area. They were in Rhode Island. And she said, no, I think I'd like you to do it. And it was just right person, right time. And I was like, why not? Let's give it a shot. And so that's when I decided to become an implementer. And I got to tell you, it was the best decision I ever made.
Interesting. I love that life hack, by the way. It's something that I've been trying to do is like, because something has to be in my brain. Like I have to be doing something. And if I'm
Mhm.
doing something in the business, I'm probably destroying it because I'm overdoing something in the business.
Yeah,
So
and
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, just ask anybody back at the bakery, about the fun roller coaster ride it was with Beth at the helm.
Yeah. One of the things that you hear about all the time as you're implementing EOS and getting into the accountability chart is like the people that are there during the first day of implementation are generally not there. Not all of them, but there's a handful because of the new systems and processes and accountability. Did you experience any kind of white water like that a year in of people
Yeah.
that just didn't believe in the system?
Not so much people that didn't believe in the system, but people that maybe weren't a fit for our culture. There was one person in particular that we had to exit out of the organization because of core values. It just. And then we did the same stuff that a lot of people do is we kept somebody around for a long time because they had institutional knowledge. One of our lead bakers, and we just felt like we couldn't get rid of that person. And so we kept them for way too long. And what ended up happening was, they chipped away at the culture. And, so that was we had, a fair amount of turnover at the beginning, just like almost all my clients do. It just happens because, you've got to make these decisions. You realize that this is the thing that's causing you to hit that ceiling in the first place is it's people. It's either people or it's process. And so you've got to, put on your big girl or big boy pants and make some tough decisions sometimes. And I got to say, when we were implementing EOS, I like to tell the story about, we had a trailing 12 that we used and we looked at it every month. And we had just opened, we had expanded to the cafe and like literally, sales were like this. So on paper, everybody would think we're doing great. Meanwhile, expenses are like, and they're hitting that, top line revenue, which means kind of already too late, right? It's like we were already starting to see that we were not going to be profitable. This was not sustainable. As soon as we implemented EOS within 3 months, no joke, the lines separated, we got back to profitability, and nobody noticed the people that exited. I mean, their absence was not felt. Do you know what I mean? And that was a real lesson for us that, it's you think you can't live without these folks and that you can't get by and you can't, build the product, deliver the service, what have you, but you can. And when in that absence of a person, what I find happens most of the time, or at least in my experience happened at the bakery, is that people just fill in. They fill in the holes and things work. And I've seen that play out with my clients over and over again too. So, if somebody is not a right fit for the organization, it should take you 1 quarter to discover that, to really say, yeah, I think we've got a right person, right seat issue. And it should take you 1 quarter to resolve it. The trouble is that most people let it go 1, 2, 3 years. I mean, they'll let that issue go for way longer than it needs to. So, I just think that's a good rule of thumb. 1 quarter to identify, 1 quarter to solve.
And so after you implement EOS in the business, it sounds like you're starting to get some great kind of performance benchmarks. You're starting to see things going in the right direction. So how long were you on EOS until, well, let me start with this. Did you sell the business?
So, I didn't explain my exit. So we didn't sell the business. My sister and I she knew that I was kind of going bonkers, right? Without that much to do and that I needed something. And so we talked and I said, look, I really want to do this EOS thing. And she's like, yeah, go. And so that was in 2018. And I went to boot camp in 2018. And I thought I would stay at the bakery for a year, but I realized pretty quickly that a year was going to be too long for me to I needed to get going. And so it ended up being 6 months. And then I ended up working Saturdays for them for the remainder of the year, just to kind of help them out. But the buyout, I actually didn't get bought out until last fall. So I remained an owner of that business for the first 5 years that I was an implementer, but I was an owner only.
Got it. And what, like if someone right now is considering getting into business with a family member, a sibling, or maybe a a childhood friend in my case, like what advice would you give them going into it?
My sister and I did pretty well considering, and we had so many people warning us. I don't know, two sisters, that could be really, a bad idea. And we were bound and determined to prove everybody wrong. And for a long time we did until we didn't, right? And I wanted to keep growing the business. I'm pretty driven, and she wanted to just have a lifestyle business. And I would, she would admit that if she were on this podcast right now. I mean, she just wanted to keep it small, easy, and so it worked to just kind of walk away. Because here's the thing, I know this may sound like, entrepreneurs will understand what I'm saying. I know how to make money. I've never been worried about how to make money. I've always figured it out, right? Since I was a little kid going door to door to get my candy money, I've known how to make money. So I knew I was going to be okay one way or the other. And so that's where I think people, that risk profile of an entrepreneur, you just have to be willing to bet the farm. And no, I don't have anything else.
If you like, it's really interesting because it sounds like did that revelation of kind of your ambitions and your aspirations and your sister's aspirations, like did you realize that downstream that they were different, like later in time, or did you know that getting into it?
Oh, I knew it going in. Yeah, I mean, I people don't change, right? So I've always been the crazy one. I'm the one that moved to LA and got into the film business. I'm the one that went to film school, not normal school. So I've always been the, I guess, rebel in the family. And, so.
It worked. Like it by all counts, it worked.
Mm-hmm.
It worked for a period of time in which, I don't know, you were able to find commonality at some level.
Yeah. And we became one of the highest respected bakeries in the country. Our decorators won national awards. There was just nowhere more to go with that single location. It's like I became the president of the trade association, like I was running out of stuff that I could achieve. Right. And then we're also, unfortunately, wired that way as well. A lot of, entrepreneurs, business owners were very achievement oriented. And so I was running out of things to do.
Yeah. And what are your aspirations today? What are your goals?
Well, today, it's interesting because, I'm getting older. My risk profile is dropping a little bit, not tremendous, but I still get very excited about stuff. And one of the things that I get really excited about is the impact that the Great Boss workshops are having. And I know that sounds like I'm doing a sales pitch here, but seriously, when I do those workshops and people get what they get out of them, which is freedom, right? Because we teach them tools that they can use, because it's all been very mysterious, how to lead and manage, how to drive accountability in your organization. And now they've got tools and they've got a structure for having a conversation. They've got, a couple of assessments so they can kind of keep themselves in check and make sure that they're leading well and managing well. And when people leave those workshops, I can see that they're genuinely excited about the prospect of being a boss again, and where they had lost a lot of that. And I just feel like from an impact standpoint, there's so much here, right? If you want to change the world and make the world a better place, you need better leaders. And we've got to start taking it seriously and training people to become better leaders. Great leaders make great leaders. We should all be very, focused on that. The world needs it right now. We need leadership. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about.
Well, and let's talk about that just a little bit more, because you have gifted an hour of your time today. So what is the Great Bosses Workshop? I realize the benefits of it, but where can somebody find it? What should they expect? Do they have to be in the We Run on EOS program? How does that work?
Yeah, so the Great Boss Workshop really is for companies running on EOS first and foremost, because we do use a lot of the EOS tools. We've had people drop into the Boss Workshop that don't know anything about EOS. And quite honestly, they're a little frustrated because everybody else in the room knows what this people analyzer thing is. Everybody else in the room knows what an accountability chart is. And if they don't have that foundation, I find that they're frustrated. So a Great Boss Workshop is really that next level course on LMA. So if you think about leadership teams, if they're working with an implementer, there's a workshop on LMA that they do in the midway point of their EOS journey. It's an hour. An hour barely scratches the surface of what the leaders in that room really, need to take in and embrace. But, it's an hour. The Great Boss Workshop is a full day workshop where we just take a deep dive on that LMA workshop, and we really get deep on the tools, and we help people, come up with strategies. We personalize it for them, and it becomes very much of an introspective thing for them to work on. Because quite honestly, becoming a great boss, it starts with introspection and really looking within, and that you can't do that in an hour. And you can't do that in a room where all the other leadership team members are. It's more of a charged atmosphere. This is something for a leader to go do. You can do it, we've done them for companies. We come in and do Great Boss workshops for all the leaders in an organization. I've done those. They're really fun. We do those private workshops. We do public workshops. The public workshops will either be located in, an area like Dallas or Chicago or somewhere like that. And then there's the public workshops that are virtual, and those are offered pretty frequently. Again, the workshops are full day, but you get a lot. You get a lot of nuggets, and you walk out of that with really feeling confident, not only with the EOS tools, but more confident as a leader and a manager. And that's really, the goal.
Got it. And so this is really, Great Boss isn't necessarily for the visionary or the integrators, for everybody. Anybody and everybody within an organization.
Anybody with LMA in their seat. And in fact, I would argue, I'll get on my soapbox here. Sometimes because leadership team members get that LMA, just that sample of LMA from their implementer, they think they're good, But quite honestly, they really need to come to the Great Boss Workshop and not just see this as a place where they go send their people. I had a workshop yesterday, and another implementer said, "Oh yeah, that we call those POWs." And I said, "Well, what is that?" She said, "Prisoner of the workshop." So that's because a boss is like, "Well, I don't have time to teach you how to be a boss, so just go to this workshop." While we get people, from that, it's a much better experience as, if you get a leadership team member and, some people from their same company coming to that, and they're all hearing the same thing at the same time, it's a lot more powerful for them. So yeah, it's for any leadership all the way down to, a supervisor.
Got it. So if someone is listening to this podcast and they're like, either A, I need to do one of these workshops and I want to do Beth's workshop, or B, they are thinking about or considering bringing on a professional or certified implementer, and they're like, I need Beth to do this for us. How would they find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. I think, you've got a link to my LinkedIn page. I think it's just do Beth Fahey, Chicago, and you should be able to find me. You could also email me, beth.fahey@eosworldwide.com.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Beth. I appreciate you coming on the show today. So many words of wisdom. It's going to be hard recapping this one, so I'm excited. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. You're welcome.
Confessions of an EOS Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses that operate on EOS, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for EOS Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.